I used to think love and respect were enough to build a strong marriage. I thought that as long as Mark and I supported each other, we could handle anything life threw at us. But over time, I began to see cracks in that foundation, subtle but persistent signs that maybe my sacrifices weren't as valued as I believed. Mark and I met at a mutual friend's wedding 8 years ago. He was charming and confident, with a quick wit that kept me laughing all night. I was working as a marketing manager back then, thriving in my career. Mark was building his own financial advising firm, and we bonded over our shared ambition and determination. When he proposed 2 years later, I didn't hesitate to say yes. We moved into a modest but comfortable home in the suburbs. Life was good, and when I found out I was pregnant with Ellie, our daughter, it felt like the perfect next chapter. We decided I would leave my job to focus on raising her, at least for the first few years. Mark was fully on board. "You're doing the hardest and most important job," he'd say, whenever I expressed doubts about giving up my career. I believed him, and for a while, I was content. The problem wasn't immediate or obvious. At first, Mark seemed proud of me, even bragging to his friends about how I was juggling motherhood with running our household. But as the months turned into years, his words of appreciation began to dwindle. Our conversation shifted from dreams and goals to mundane updates about bills, errands, and Ellie's milestones. It was as if, in his mind, I had become part of the background, someone reliable but unremarkable. I started noticing his subtle dismissiveness during family gatherings, particularly when his mother, Irene, was around. Irene had always been an imposing figure, elegant and sharp-tongued, with a knack for making her opinions known. From the day we announced our engagement, she made it clear she wasn't thrilled about me joining the family. "Well, I suppose you'll do," she had said, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Over time, I realized her approval was something I would never fully earn. As much as I tried to keep peace with Irene, she always found ways to needle me. Comments about my cooking, my parenting, or even the way I dressed were delivered with a saccharine tone that made it hard to call her out. "Ellie's hair would look so much cuter in braids," she'd suggest, her gaze lingering on my daughter's untamed curls. Or, "It's nice you're home all day. You must have so much time to organize things," implying that my every moment should be dedicated to perfecting our household. Mark rarely stepped in. "That's just how Mom is," he'd say, shrugging off my frustration. "She doesn't mean anything by it." I would bite my tongue, not wanting to stir up more tension. After all, Irene was family, and Mark was doing his best to provide for us. But every time he brushed off her comments, a tiny part of me felt smaller, more invisible. Things came to a head about a year ago when I finally convinced Mark that we needed a second car. Our schedule had become hectic, with Ellie starting preschool and me juggling drop-offs, grocery runs, and doctor appointments. We decided on a sleek, practical SUV safe for Ellie and spacious enough for road trips. It was my dream car and the first major purchase I had made since leaving my job. I remember the pride I felt driving it home from the dealership, the way Ellie squealed with delight as she climbed into her car seat. For a while, the SUV became a symbol of my independence, a reminder that even as a stay-at-home mom, I still had agency. But Irene saw it differently. "Such a nice car for someone who barely drives," she commented during her first visit after we bought it. I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me, like a splinter I couldn't quite remove. Mark didn't seem to notice the growing tension between Irene and me, or maybe he just didn't want to. He was busier than ever with work, coming home late most nights and spending weekends catching up on emails. I told myself it was temporary, that things would get better once he landed a few more clients. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slipping further into the background of my own life. Irene's influence on Mark began to show in subtle ways. He started taking her side in small disagreements, brushing off my concerns with phrases like, "You know how she gets," or "She's just trying to help." I didn't realize how much this dynamic was eroding my confidence until the day it all came crashing down. It started as an ordinary Saturday morning. I was busy preparing breakfast, Ellie perched on her booster seat, humming a tune while scribbling on a coloring book. Mark strolled into the kitchen, coffee in hand, looking unusually pleased with himself. "I did something nice for Mom," he announced, leaning against the counter. I glanced up from the pancakes I was flipping. "Oh? What's the occasion?" He hesitated, an almost imperceptible flicker of guilt crossing his face. "Well, she's been having trouble getting around since her car broke down, so I let her borrow yours for a while." The spatula froze mid-air. "You what?" Mark took a casual sip of his coffee, as if he hadn't just dropped a bombshell. "I gave Mom your car. She really needs it right now, and you're home most of the time, so it's not like you need it as much." For a moment, I couldn't process what I'd just heard. My heart started pounding in my chest, and the smell of burning pancakes snapped me out of my stupor. I hastily turned off the stove, my hands trembling. "Mark, you gave her my car? Without even asking me?" He had the audacity to shrug. "It's not like it's forever. She's just borrowing it until she can figure out a replacement. She needed it more than you do." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "She needed it more than me? Mark, I bought that car. It's in my name. How could you think you had the right to just hand it over?" His face hardened, his defensive tone cutting through the tension. "You're a stay-at-home mom, Clara. You don't go anywhere important. Mom's car breaking down is an actual emergency." Ellie looked up from her coloring book, her wide eyes darting between us. "Mommy, are you okay?" I forced myself to take a deep breath, crouching down to give her a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Keep coloring, okay?" My voice was calm for her sake, but inside I was a hurricane of emotions. When I stood back up, I fixed Mark with a glare that could have melted steel. "This isn't just about the car, Mark. It's about you deciding that what I do doesn't matter. You didn't even ask me. You made a decision for my life, for our family, without considering how it would affect me." He rolled his eyes, the condescension in his demeanor sparking a fresh wave of anger. "Clara, you're blowing this out of proportion. Mom's family. We help family." "Family?" I echoed bitterly. "You mean the woman who constantly undermines me, criticizes me, and now gets handed my car like it's her birthright? That's the family I'm supposed to be sacrificing for?" Mark flinched but didn't back down. "You're overreacting. It's just a car." "No, it's not just a car, Mark. It's my independence. It's my ability to take Ellie to her doctor appointments, to run errands without being stranded, to have even a sliver of control over my life." The argument escalated, voices rising and bouncing off the walls of our usually quiet home. Mark dug his heels in, refusing to acknowledge that he had done anything wrong. By the time he stormed out of the kitchen, I was left standing there, shaking with fury and disbelief. Later that afternoon, Irene texted me a photo of my car parked in her driveway. "Thanks for the help, Clara," the caption read, with a winking emoji. My hands clenched around my phone, my teeth grinding as I read her smug message. Mark's betrayal had cut deep, but Irene's gloating twisted the knife. I couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that settled over me like a heavy blanket. My own husband had dismissed my needs, reduced my life to a convenience he could rearrange at will. I realized then that this wasn't just about the car. It was about reclaiming my voice, my worth, and my independence. I didn't know how I would do it yet, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this slide. The days following Mark's betrayal were a blur of simmering anger and escalating tensions. Irene had my car, flaunting it like it was her own personal trophy. I tried to focus on Ellie, her innocence and laughter, a fragile anchor keeping me from being consumed by my growing resentment. But every time I thought about Irene cruising around in the car I'd worked so hard to choose and buy, I felt the sting of humiliation all over again. Mark's dismissiveness only added fuel to the fire. He treated the issue as though it were a petty squabble, something I'd eventually let go. "She'll return it soon," he said one evening, brushing past me as I stood in the kitchen. "You're making too big a deal out of this." "How would you feel if someone just took something of yours, Mark?" I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady despite the frustration boiling under the surface. "And how is she supposed to return it if I don't even have a set of keys now?" He waved me off, not even bothering to engage. "You're home most of the day. You don't really need it." That phrase, "you don't need it," echoed in my mind, grating against my last nerve. It wasn't just about the car. It was about what that car represented. It was about being dismissed, being told my contributions to this family didn't matter as much as Irene's so-called needs. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. 2 days later, I tried to confront Mark again. This time, I was prepared. I'd written down everything I wanted to say, determined not to let him steamroll me with his indifference. "Mark," I started as he sat on the couch scrolling on his phone. "We need to talk." He sighed, not even looking up. "Can we not do this right now? I've had a long day." "No, we're doing this right now," I said firmly, stepping between him and the TV. "You took my car without asking. You gave it to your mother without any consideration for how it would affect me or Ellie. And instead of admitting you were wrong, you're acting like I'm the problem." Mark finally set his phone down, his jaw tightening. "Clara, it's not like you're stranded. If you need to go somewhere, I'll drive you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You'll drive me? What am I, a child? Do you realize how condescending that sounds?" He rubbed his temples, clearly annoyed. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Mom's car broke down. What was I supposed to do? Let her struggle?" "Yes!" I snapped, my patience snapping along with it. "She's a grown woman, Mark. She can figure it out like the rest of us do. You don't just take from one family member to give to another without asking." "You're being selfish," he shot back, standing up. "Mom has done so much for us." "No, Mark," I interrupted, my voice shaking with anger. "She's done so much for you. All she's done for me is criticize and undermine me every chance she gets. And now she has my car. My car, Mark. Do you even hear yourself?" The argument spiraled from there, with Mark doubling down on his decision and me refusing to back down. By the end of it, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, shaking, tears streaming down my face as Ellie peeked around the corner, wide-eyed and frightened. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked softly, clutching her stuffed bunny. I forced a smile, kneeling down to hug her. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay." But as I held her, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let this go. Mark and Irene needed to understand that I wasn't some doormat they could walk all over. I began to strategize. Late at night, while Mark was asleep, I pored over the car's paperwork, confirming what I already knew. The title was solely in my name. Irene had no legal claim to it. I also started researching how to report a vehicle as stolen, quietly gathering the information I'd need to take back what was mine. In the meantime, Irene's audacity continued to grow. She sent photos of herself at the salon, captioned with smug remarks like, "So convenient having a reliable car again," and "Thanks for your generosity, Clara." Every message was like a slap in the face, and Mark's refusal to intervene only deepened the rift between us. One afternoon, I decided to confront Irene directly. I called her and calmly asked when she planned to return the car. "Oh, Clara, I'm so glad you called," she chirped, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I was just thinking about you. The car's been such a lifesaver, you know. I don't know how I managed without it." "Irene," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, "I need my car back. When can I come pick it up?" There was a pause, and then her voice hardened. "Clara, don't be unreasonable. You're home all day. What do you even need it for?" "Irene, that car is mine. It's in my name. You need to return it." Her laughter on the other end of the line sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, Clara, don't be so dramatic. Mark and I already talked about this. He's fine with it, so I don't see why you're making such a fuss." The conversation ended with me hanging up, shaking with rage. It was clear Irene had no intention of giving the car back, and Mark wasn't going to do anything about it. If I wanted it back, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. A week later, I finally made the call. I dialed the dealership, explaining the situation and reporting the car as stolen. The representative on the other end was sympathetic, assuring me that they'd notify the authorities and help resolve the issue as quickly as possible. When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control, standing up for myself in a way I hadn't dared to before. It wasn't just about the car anymore, it was about reclaiming my voice, my autonomy, and my dignity. I had no idea how Mark or Irene would react, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to back down. The call came in the middle of the afternoon. I was folding Ellie's laundry while she played in her room, her giggles occasionally drifting into the hallway. My phone buzzed on the countertop, the name Mark flashing across the screen. I braced myself and answered, already anticipating the storm on the other end. "Clara, what the hell did you do?" Mark's voice was sharp, more enraged than I had ever heard it. "What I had to do," I replied evenly, though my heart was racing. "The car is in my name, and your mother refused to return it. I reported it stolen." "You called the police on my mother?" he spat, disbelief dripping from every word. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "Humiliating for who, Mark?" My voice rose, my anger bubbling to the surface. "For your mother, who took something that doesn't belong to her? Or for you, who let her get away with it?" He sputtered, caught off guard by my sharpness. "She's family, Clara. You don't call the cops on family." "You're absolutely right, Mark," I said, my voice cold. "You don't call the cops on family, but that's the thing, I don't feel like family. I feel like an afterthought in my own home." Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. My stomach lurched. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on the porch, calm but firm. One of them held a clipboard. The other offered me a polite nod. "Mrs. Clara Parker?" the officer asked. "Yes, that's me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're here regarding the vehicle reported stolen. We've located the car and spoken to the person in possession of it, a Mrs. Irene Parker. She claims your husband gave her permission to use the vehicle. Can you confirm this?" I nodded. "He gave her permission, but the car is registered in my name. I didn't consent, and I've asked for it back multiple times. She refused." The officer glanced at his clipboard. "The vehicle is being impounded as we speak. We'll need you to come to the station to retrieve it once the paperwork is finalized." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. "I'll be there as soon as possible." As the officers left, Mark stormed into the kitchen, slamming his briefcase onto the counter. His face was red with fury, and his fists were clenched at his sides. "This is beyond petty, Clara. Do you realize how childish this makes you look? Calling the police on my mom over a car?" "It's not just a car, Mark," I yelled, the frustration of weeks of being dismissed and demeaned finally boiling over. "It's about respect. It's about you and your mother treating me like I don't matter, like I'm just some background character in your lives." "She's my mother," he shouted back. "She needed help. And I'm your wife," I shot back, tears stinging my eyes. "I've spent years sacrificing for this family, putting my own dreams on hold, and for what? So you can throw my needs aside whenever it suits you?" Mark stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for a rebuttal, but there was nothing he could say to undo the damage. The fallout came quickly. Irene called that evening, her voice trembling with indignation. "How dare you involve the police, Clara? Do you know how embarrassing that was for me?" "Not as embarrassing as stealing someone else's property, Irene," I replied, my voice steady. "You've crossed the line too many times, and I'm done pretending it's okay." "You're tearing this family apart," she hissed. "No, Irene," I said firmly. "You and Mark did that all on your own." The line went dead, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. 2 days later, I arrived at the impound lot to retrieve my car. Seeing it parked there, dusty but unharmed, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been taken away. I ran my hand over the hood, feeling a swell of determination. This wasn't just a vehicle. It was my independence, my proof that I wouldn't be pushed around anymore. I drove home, my hands gripping the wheel tightly as I rehearsed what I needed to say to Mark. When I walked through the door, he was sitting on the couch, his face pale and drawn. "Clara," he began, his voice subdued. "I didn't realize how much this was hurting you." "It shouldn't have taken this for you to realize it," I said, standing firm. "You chose your mother's convenience over your wife's autonomy. Do you know how that feels?" He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I messed up. I see that now. I don't know how to fix this." I took a deep breath, the weight of weeks of anger and betrayal still heavy in my chest. "The first step is understanding that I'm your partner, Mark, not an accessory, not someone whose needs come second to your mother's demands. If you can't start treating me like an equal, this marriage isn't going to work." Mark nodded slowly, his face etched with regret. "You're right. I'll do better." "I hope so," I said quietly, "because I'm not going to fight for respect anymore. If I don't get it, I'll walk away." For the first time in years, I saw something crack in Mark's composure. Fear that I might actually mean it, and I did. The weeks following the confrontation were tense but clarifying. Mark kept his distance at first, a mix of guilt and uncertainty clouding his interactions with me. Irene, true to form, sent a series of passive-aggressive text messages, each one more indignant than the last. I ignored them all. I wasn't interested in justifying my actions or making peace. For once, I was focused solely on myself and Ellie. Mark finally began to make an effort, though it was clumsy at first. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, he approached me with a tentative look. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone subdued. I set the dish towel down and nodded, folding my arms across my chest. "I'm listening," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, about everything, about how I handled this, and how I've been treating you." I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch. He needed to say this on his own. "You're right, I dismissed you, I didn't respect your feelings, and I didn't see how much I was hurting you." He paused, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like weeks. "I let my mom's needs overshadow yours, and that was wrong. I'm sorry." It wasn't the grand apology I had imagined, but there was a rawness to his words that made me believe he was genuine. Still, I wasn't ready to let him off the hook entirely. "Mark," I began, my voice steady, "this isn't just about the car. It's about how you've made me feel invisible, like my contributions to this family don't matter. I've been sacrificing so much to keep things running smoothly, and all I've gotten in return is your indifference and your mom's condescension." His shoulders slumped, and he nodded. "I know, and I don't want you to feel like that anymore. I've been a terrible partner, Clara. I want to fix this, if you'll let me." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Actions, Mark. Words don't mean anything without actions. Over the next month, Mark started to prove he was serious about making changes. He began helping more around the house, taking over bedtime routines with Ellie so I could have time to myself. He even started setting boundaries with Irene, something I had never thought I'd see. The first time he told her no was nothing short of miraculous. Irene had called to complain about needing help with her groceries, and Mark calmly but firmly told her he couldn't drop everything to assist her. I overheard the conversation and was stunned by his composure. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his tone resolute. "But Clara and I have a lot going on, and I need to be here for my family." When he hung up, he turned to me, a small sheepish smile on his face. "Progress?" he asked. I smiled back, nodding. Progress. As for Irene, her response was predictable. She stopped coming around as often, clearly upset about her diminished influence over Mark. She even went so far as to demand an apology from me for humiliating her, but I refused to engage. She eventually backed off, though not without a few parting shots in the form of snide comments during family gatherings. I met them with a calm, steady confidence she couldn't rattle. With the tension easing at home, I started thinking about my own future. I'd put so much of myself on hold for the sake of my family, and it was time to reclaim those parts of me I had let slip away. I reached out to an old colleague who now ran a freelance marketing agency, and within weeks, I was taking on small projects from home. The work energized me, reminding me of the person I had been before I became just a mom. Mark noticed the change almost immediately. "You seem happier," he remarked one evening as we sat on the porch, watching Ellie chase fireflies in the yard. "I feel happier," I admitted. "I'm finally doing something for myself again." He reached over, taking my hand in his. "I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see how much you've been giving up." For the first time in months, I felt a genuine warmth between us, a connection that had been missing for far too long. In the end, reclaiming my car was about so much more than transportation. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my independence. Mark and I still had work to do, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were partners again. And as I watched Ellie's laughter light up the twilight, I knew I was finally steering my life in the direction I wanted it to go. 6 months later, life looked completely different. I had built a steady stream of freelance clients and even set up a small home office. Ellie loved helping me with sticky notes and colorful drawings, and Mark made it a point to celebrate every win, no matter how small. He was still working on setting boundaries with Irene, but the effort was there, and it showed. Irene, predictably, stayed distant, though I didn't miss her barbs or meddling. The peace in our home was worth every awkward holiday dinner. My car, now firmly mine again, gleamed in the driveway like a quiet victory. One evening, as Mark and I tucked Ellie into bed, he turned to me with a soft smile. "I've never been more proud of you, Clara. Of us." I leaned against him, feeling a newfound sense of balance. I'd fought for my independence and my respect, and I had won. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was my story, written on my terms.